So, today what we're doing is we're going to talk about personal finance. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about managing credit cards. By the end of today's lesson, what you will be able to do is you'll be able to calculate how many days before you actually start to get charged for your credit card interest. You're also going to be able to calculate the interest that's on your credit card. Now, all the work that we did in the last unit was building up to this and making you a little bit more aware of how credit cards work. So, without further ado, here we go. When you're considering to have a credit card, you need to consider a couple of things. There's usually an annual fee, and when you get something like that, you'll usually ask, how much is it? There are a few credit cards that don't charge annual fees. Those tends to have higher credit interest than others. When you're also thinking about your credit card, you're also trying to figure out which one is the best interest rate. As with compounding interest, we talked about that last unit, we found that if the interest was higher but the compounding period was the same, that you'd end up paying more compared to the other credit card or payment or amortization. Now, we always want to have the lowest rate because the lowest rate is the best. Technically, when you think about credit cards are calculated in such a way that they say that you have an interest per year, but really they want to charge you for every day that you haven't paid your balance. How often is it compounded? Well, if there's 365 days in a year, that's how many days your money is compounded for. Now, the other thing that we're going to take a look at is how many days after the monthly statement issued is the payment due, right? We usually call that a grace period. On every credit card, you can actually charge something on your credit card, and then they give you a certain amount of time to wait and then pay it off before you get interest. We usually call that a grace period. The other thing you need to consider is how much interest is charged if the balance is paid in full by the due date. In this case, we have none. Now, the other thing that you need to consider when you have a credit card is if there are any incentives or rewards associated with being a card holder. For example, I have a Petro-Canada card. I'm not advertising for Petro-Canada, but a couple of months ago I actually got 89 cents gas. You probably don't even remember when gas was that cheap because you just started driving right about then. But I got 89 cents because when I used my Petro Points credit card from CIBC, I actually got rewards for going to Petro-Canada, double the rewards, but then also they gave me 2 cents off for every liter that was put into my tank. It was amazing. I was so happy. I felt like it was 2003 all over again, when gas prices were closer to 60 cents a liter. Alright, so right now we're going to take a look at a monthly credit card statement. Now, if you see, as you can see, there's a thing called a grace period on the right side of the screen. Now, that thing that you see, that grace period, notice it says 21 days. Basically, All it means is that you don't have to pay interest for 21 days. So the moment you make a charge on that credit card, by the 21st day of the current period that you have something new, you have 21 days before you actually get charged. When you take a look at this part here, when it says we got to do the minimum payment, they tend to have a minimum payment of $10 or 3% of the balance. So let's say that you had less than $10. They kind of want you to get rid of that balance as quickly as possible. So they don't want you to carry a balance of $9 on their credit card, right? Because they're not going to make any money on it if you only pay $2.15 total in interest. That can happen. So when we're talking about this, we're going to eventually start calculating this during the lesson. This really means 3 over 100 times the balance, just like we practiced last unit. We always took the rate, we always took the interest, divided by 300 and got the balance. Okay? Now, there are a few things we're going to be going over. So, we're going to keep using this credit card statement. Remember, the credit limit is $1,000. The advance limit, this part here, is actually talking about how much money you can actually pull from the ATM from your credit card. They usually give you some sort of PIN. It works almost identical to what you would have if you were using just a regular bank card. So now we're going to answer the following statements. Ahmed always is issued his statement on the 8th of each month. Now, remember, you told me that there was 21 days of a grace period, right? So the statement is issued, and then any interest that happens starts from that day. So suppose he gets a bill on the 29th. Sorry, on the 8th. Now, basically, if you think about it, the grace period is just 21 days. And this is why I said 29. I'm sorry about this. I just tooted my own horn before we even began. Thus, if you think about it, 8 plus 21 is 29. So that means on the 29th day of at the end of the month is his grace period. And then he has to start paying interest on the stuff that he used on his credit card. So here's B. On September statement, Ahmed had a balance of $86.83, right? Determine his minimum payment. When you see this, we're going to refer back to what we used to do when we're talking about percents. If I said 3% of 86.36, we really meant this. 3 divided by 100 times 86.03. And that gives us a final answer of $2.59. Every time we do these problems, we always tend to want to have a concluding statement, so we always do this. So, since $10 is greater than $2.59, he's going to end up paying $10 based on the rules that was defined up above on the statement. You either paid a minimum of $10 or you paid 3% of the balance. So in this case, we only had $2.59. So guess what? The credit card company is going to charge you $10 instead. They're evil, aren't they? But you know what? Sometimes you need this stuff. All right, now, on October's statement, Ahmed had a balance of $46.18. Sorry, $462.18. We're going to determine what the minimum payment is. Now, you got to remember, if the minimum payment was if we took 3% of that number and it was less than $10, we still had to pay $10. But let's say that we had something that was more than $10, then what would happen is we would just charge You'd just be charged that amount of money by the credit card company. So, first of all, let's see what we have here. You're going to try this on your own. It's the same as Part B. Take a minute, and we'll do that. All right, let's see what we have here. Let's follow the pattern. So it's 3% of 462.18, which is the same as saying 3 divided by 100 times 462.18. And when we do this calculation, what we're going to find is the answer is going to be $13.87. Now, let me ask you, how much you think you're going to pay? Think about it. All right. Basically, we're going to end up having to pay $13.87, which is greater than 10. So he's going to pay that much amount of money. That's all you need to understand here. Now, let's move on to the next thing. Or you know what? Tell you what. We'll wait a few seconds for everybody to catch up. I want to make sure everybody has this down. Okay, so now let's start talking about processing of fees. You know that when you go and pay your credit card or you pay stuff for different services when you grow up, people either tend to go to the business or they tend to go to their bank to pay directly to the business through there. Now, with credit cards, you can either send in a check or you can get it processed by the credit card company on their own. Now, the problem is, remember, you guys calculated earlier that it was on the 29th days you had to have your money in. So basically, for 21 days, you didn't get charged. From the 8th to the 29th, you didn't get charged. So on the 29th, you would get charged. Now, notice, it says here it takes 3 whole days to process the payment. 3 business days. 3 whole days to process it. We're going to be simple and just say 3 days. What that means is that we have to make sure that money is started at the bank or started at the credit company 3 days earlier than the last day of the grace period. So in this case, what we're going to do is simple. The due date is the 29th. We're just simply going to subtract 3, and we realize that the day that we're going to pay in October ends up being October the 26th. We have to get that check in or the cash directly into the bank account of the credit card company for the 26th. If we get it on the 26th, it takes 3 more days to process. And if it processes well, nothing bounces, then guess what? You don't have any interest to pay. That's all. So let's just take a moment. No big deal. Make sure you write this down. Now just remember, if you pay by the 26th, if you pay by the latest, the 26th of October, you won't have any interest tacked onto his bill. That's all you need to remember. So for you guys, when you have your own credit card, there's a certain number of days you got to put your money, like 3 or 5 days, before the money gets pulled out of your account, put towards your credit card. If you miss that 5 days, even though you paid the money after it, you're going to get tacked interest based on the 21 days. It's a horrible thing. But that's how they do it. I hope you're all doing well. Hope this is making sense. Alright, so we're going to start to do some calculations next in the next section. Okay, here we go. Now, this is the next part of your sheet. If interest is compounded daily, determine the daily interest rate. This is for question number 1A and 1B from your work for today. Let's talk about how this works. Okay? We're going to round our answers to 4 decimal places when we calculate it. So, remember, if we look back at the original statement, let's go back to the original statement. On the original statement, what does it say? It says that the interest is 14.9%. So, let's calculate the interest rate. So, the yearly interest rate is 14.9%. The daily interest rate is 14.9% divided by 365, which ends up being 0.048. So the daily interest rate is 0.048%. So this is how you would do one of the questions for questions 1A and 1B. They have to be done this way in order to calculate the daily interest rate. You also know this as I. You also know it as I. If you remember, I equals 4.048, you're going to divide that by 100 again. Now, let's calculate the interest rate. If the bill is paid late, one of those horrible times I told you, never let this happen. What we're going to do is we're going to calculate the interest rate in October. Yeah, okay, so that's what we're doing here. Let's just start. So basically what happens is you're getting charged in October's bill, right? And we paid it 5 days after the due date. Now, Ahmed paid off his bill in September, but then he went and made a new purchase in the middle of September on November 15th. So that's a couple of days. Let's go over this formula. So remember, he pays the bill on November 3rd. Now, on November 3rd, a whole bunch of things happen. Let's just talk about that right now. Remember, he paid his entire beginning of September, so he had no money owing. Later that month, he decided to use his credit card again on the 15th of September. So his balance now is $462.18. So he immediately starts to pay interest on this amount if he misses his latest statement. So here's what's happening. We need to figure out how many days happened between September 15th and November 3rd. So you got to remember the old nursery rhyme. 30 days have September, April, June, November. All the rest have 31. Save for February, it has 28 days clear. 29 each leap year. So in this, we're just going to start our calculations. We got to figure out the number of days. So from September 15th to September 30th, there are 15 days. From October 1st to October 31st, that is a total of 31 days. And now, from November 3rd, November 1st to November 3rd, we have 3 days. So that's a total of 49 days. Now I'll give you a moment. You can copy that. I'll give you a moment and you can just copy that down. All right. Here we go. Let's move on. So now we have our total number of days being 49 days. Now that represents the number of compounding days, right? So that's the number of days that our interest is going to be compounded on the 462.18 that we talked about earlier. So let's move on. So right now, we have some issues to deal with. We need to set up our equations. So let's talk about this. So every time we do a compound interest problem, we always start with P and I and A. We don't know what A is. Don't care. We'll figure that out. But I is 14.9, just like we did last unit. 14.9 divided by 100. Now, because this is daily interest, we're going to divide it by 365 to get this number here, this decimal number, this I value. If you wanted to, you could have taken that percentage that you calculated in the previous question and just divide it by 100. It's the same thing. I could say, give me the percentage, the daily percent. You calculate that, and then when I say give me I, you just divide that once more by 100. But right now, every time we do these calculations, I just want you to show me this calculation so we know we always get it right. You guys did pretty well on that last test, by the way. Now, the N value. The N value for this is 49 because 49 days have passed by. So the compounding period is 49. The interest is this, and the P is this. Now the equation for every compounding problem is A is equal to P bracket 1 plus I to the N, and that's it. Let's go. Now take a moment and look at this problem. They have asked us originally to go and calculate the interest, but in order to do that, we first have to calculate A. In this case, A is 471.51 in the end. Once we calculate it, I just forgot to write this in. Rookie mistake on my part. I apologize. Now, once we've done that, we're going to calculate I. I is equal to A minus P. And then we just substitute directly in. Remember what I told you, just right up here, when you're done A is equal to 471.51. I want you to put that right here. Now, we're going to go back. So I is equal to A minus P. I is equal to 471.51 minus 462.18. That gives us an interest of $9.33. That's how much interest we actually paid on this. So, in the end, we're going to end up paying $9.33 interest. These are the types of problems that you're going to have in your homework today. So just take your time and write down these problems. These are for you. All we're doing in this unit is making sure that we understand how the interest works on a daily basis in the real world. Okay? All right, just take a moment, copy down the rest of this note here. And we'll just go back up here one sec. Copy this, copy the beginning for the calculation. I'll give you a moment. So calculate, so make sure you have your A, your P, and your I. And now we'll start our calculations. Our calculations are based on this. So start writing down the sections for A. So that's this stuff here. All right, and now just copy the last bit here. So remember, the end of A is equal to 471.51. Make sure you put that right here in your notes. Right there in your notes. And then we have to calculate interest. Interest is just I is equal to A minus P. I is equal to 471.51 minus 462.18. I is equal to 933. So he's going to pay 933 in interest. And that's it for today. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I know that I'm not there today, but I will be checking your homework next day. Here are the questions. Just remember that these are, just take a moment and make sure that these are filled in before you go on. Everything that's highlighted must be filled in on your sheet. There's not much there. Only these three things. Just remember that when you have an interest on a credit cards are, the interest is much higher because, you know what, they just don't feel that they can trust you. And this is the best way for them to force you to remember to pay your bill early. The higher the interest rate, the more you want to get rid of that payment. All right? Now remember, the most important thing about the credit cards is that if you manage to pay before the end of the grace period, you don't end up paying any interest. But if you miss it, if you miss that grace period, they will charge you for all 21 days easily, if they could. And it's the reason why we only calculated from the day of the first purchase is because, well, we started on the 15th. So the moment that you use your credit card again on the 15th, you start owing money on that too. Okay, here we go. And this is our last page. Today's practice questions. I want you to make sure that you have 1A, 1AB, 2AB, and at least number 5 done before you leave the class today. It must be done. All right? Most of you will be able to get up to question number 7 or 8 before you leave. I would like you to do your best and get that done before you leave. Now, if you decide that you guys want to do these questions in partners, you can. That's fine. Just make sure that I have the work ready for next day. Because, just a hint, I plan to give you a quiz on this at some point. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint. Yes, a pop quiz is coming tomorrow. Take care. Bye, guys.